Hi, I want to talk to you today about corporate social responsibility. And specifically, we're going to begin discussing two different theories of managerial responsibilities. What is the job of a manager in a business? Is it to promote, to preserve, to protect the interests of the shareholders, the owners of the business? Or is it broader than that? Is it to take care of not only the owner's interests, but also the interests of all those others who are affected, the employees, for example, of the business, the customers, the suppliers, the various people, including the society at large and the environment, that might be affected by the business's operations? Well, I'm going to start with the question of what corporate social responsibility is. A lot of corporations on the contemporary scene have officers of corporate social responsibility, but what is their job? What do they do? What's the general issue here? It turns out those two schools of thinking about management have rather different attitudes about the nature of corporate social responsibility. So let's start out by defining just what it is. What is a corporate social responsibility? There are several distinctions we have to draw to understand what corporate social responsibility really is. The first is between internal and external responsibilities. A company has responsibilities to the people within it. To, yes, the owners, to the managers, to the employees, to the people who actually work for the company. It also has obligations to the outside world, to some extent, people it does business with, its customers, its suppliers, and so on. It may well have responsibilities to the larger community. So when we think about corporate social responsibilities, we're thinking about specifically social responsibilities in the sense of external responsibilities, responsibilities to people outside the corporation. And usually it means to the community at large, the society at large, around the corporation. The second distinction we have to draw is between perfect and imperfect obligations. This is a traditional philosophical distinction. It's mentioned by Kant, it's mentioned by John Stuart Mill. Both of them use it in their theories, but it goes all the way back to Cicero, who, in his work on duties, attributes it to some Stoic thinkers who wrote well before him. The Stoic thinkers and Cicero characterize the distinction in terms of, you might say, the completeness of the obligation. So, some obligations are quite perfect or complete. That is to say, they're specific. If I have a mortgage, for example, or have taken out a loan, if I rent something, then I owe somebody specific a certain amount of money by a certain time. My obligations there, my responsibilities are quite specific. The same thing can be true internally in a company. I've agreed to pay somebody so much for doing a job. They do the job. It is now my responsibility to pay them that amount. I can't pay somebody else a similar amount. I can't pay them a different amount. I have to live up to the terms of my agreement. That's a perfect obligation. It is specified, maybe not in every respect. It's not clear, let's say, if I pay them in cash or if I pay them by check or by a direct deposit or something else. But nevertheless, it's quite specific. I have to do a particular kind of thing for a particular person by a particular time. That's not true of an imperfect obligation. Imperfect obligations allow the person who has the obligation choice. So a classic example is charity. It may be that I have a real responsibility to help those in need in my community, but that doesn't give anyone else a right to my help. It doesn't commit me to doing a certain specific amount for any specific person by any specific time. And so one way to think about this distinction is that perfect obligations do generate rights. If I have a perfect obligation to someone, then it is specified to whom I have that obligation and what I have to do. That gives them a right to my performance. But that's not true in the case of an imperfect obligation. The person raising money for charity can't call me up and demand as a matter of rights that I give them my support. Instead, it may be that I in general ought to support needy groups and worthwhile endeavors in my community, but there is no specific endeavor, no specific need that I have to do anything specific in regard to. What is then corporate social responsibility? It's a matter of imperfect obligations that are external to typically the community. In some cases of multinational businesses, that may be the entire world. In more national businesses, it may well be the nation, the society that it's a part of, but many businesses really construe this in terms of the locality. It may be a small business. It's concerned with supporting things in the community. It may well be a somewhat larger business, but still it has branch offices in places and it feels obligations to those specific communities. So we're talking about imperfect obligations to surrounding communities that are external to the company. There's another distinction that can help us understand the nature of corporate social responsibility. Sometimes a business looks at the surrounding community and thinks, if we strengthen the community, we are going to be better off. Maybe our customers will be better able to afford our products. Maybe we will simply have a better image in the community and people will feel more loyalty to us. They will have a more positive feeling about our brand. Maybe it's that we want our community to be a vibrant place for us to live, for us to be able to attract new employees to the area. And so in any case, the business may well think it's good for us to contribute to the community, to fulfill imperfect obligations, helping our community, because really that helps us. Now, nobody thinks that a business should not be able to do that. Of course, if it's going to help the business, then it's entirely reasonable for the business to make that contribution to the community, a contribution that is going to pay off in terms of its own self-interest. The real question arises with respect to corporate social responsibility, these external imperfect obligations, when this is not something the company expects to help it in any direct way. Now, maybe it's just a marketing effort. It's part of the advertising campaign, part of building up the image of the brand. However, often companies feel a greater responsibility. Think, and in fact you'll often hear this language, we need to give back to the community. And that's not because it's going to be good for the company. It's because it's good for the community. It's because it fulfills an external obligation. If I give money to a charity, if I support an arts organization or a musical group or something like that, typically I don't do it because I think it's going to benefit me. Now, it might, and I might be concerned about that, but often I simply think, here's a group that's worthy and needs help. And so it's a question of companies doing that. The question is that legitimate? Now you might think, why not? Of course the company can do that in the same way that an individual can give its money. But it's a subtler question when it comes to corporate social responsibility. After all, some people own shares of that company. Some people own the business. And any money contributed in that way comes out of their pockets. Now, if I choose to contribute to some organization, that's coming out of my pocket. I am making that free choice. There's nothing wrong with that. On the other hand, in a business, if it's the owner choosing to do this, again, seems to be nothing wrong with that. But what if it's somebody who is not the owner? What if it's somebody who's doing this, in fact, without the owner's consent? It's rather like someone else agreeing to make a donation and then taking the money from my wallet, you might think. And so, in the case of corporate social responsibility, we have to think carefully about these issues. When someone gives, contributing in a way that helps something in the community without helping them, and gives of their own free will, out of their own resources, we tend to think of that as a virtuous thing. It is fulfilling an imperfect obligation to the community. It's a good thing. We want to encourage it. But we don't want to encourage people to take from others to give to other people in the community. It's one thing for me to give my own money. It's quite another thing for me to rob my neighbor and give their money. And so we need to think through these questions of corporate social responsibility very carefully. What are the obligations of managers of business? Is it legitimate for them to choose to make that kind of contribution when it doesn't help the business without the owner's knowledge or the consent of the owners? Those are issues that are thorny issues. What if the owners have given them, in effect, the authority to do this? Well, then maybe that's legitimate. A very wealthy person, for example, might not make their own philanthropic decisions. They hire someone else to examine requests that they receive, to examine worthy causes, and to make determinations about where the help can do the most good. Companies can do the same thing. Owners of companies can do the same thing. But with corporations with many shareholders, it's much harder to really understand what it would be to get the approval of the shareholders as a group for such activities. So, we're going to look at a couple of different theories that have very different attitudes about this. The managerial theory, that tends to say managers are responsible for promoting the interests of the shareholders, of the owners, and then stakeholder theory, that says managers have a broader responsibility, not only to the owners, the shareholders, but also to all of the stakeholders, those who were affected by the action. So in our next video, we'll look first at the managerial theory, then we'll turn to the stakeholder theory. Finally, we'll look at a compromise position that puts directors in a very special position. After that, we'll think about what it is that boards of directors ought to do and how they ought to do it.